We left at 11 o'clock in the evening, and the Tremo brothers were delighted with the warm welcome from the prefect and the marshal. Our game bags were well stocked with hares. I spent my time hunting. I went to see my father, who invited me to a hunt. I could not refuse. Upon arriving at the rendezvous, he said to me, "Here is the track of 3 deer that spent the night in this thicket. They are not far. Come, I will place you. You will hold my dog, and in a quarter of an hour you will walk straight ahead. As soon as I shoot, you will release her." I set off, and upon reaching the middle of my course, I heard 2 shots. I released the dog, and I heard my father shouting, "This way!" I arrived. What was my astonishment? 2 deer on the ground. "I killed both of them. I should have had all 3, he said. "I was too hasty. Let's go to the farm. Someone will come to fetch them. But," he said, "we need 2 hares. Each of us gets 1. I know where to find them." Within an hour, the hares were in the game bag. "That's enough," I said. "Let's go." I made my farewells from door to go to Beauvoir, to Father Thibault, to take my little brother and bring him with me to Paris. I hid my departure. I only told my comrade Eylau, and I left at 2 o'clock in the morning. Arriving in Paris, I immediately placed my brother as a wine merchant's boy. I went to my barracks, where my comrades welcomed me back. I received my full pay and 3 months of my legion, which gave me 200 francs. It boosted my finances. Exempt from service for a month by order of the captain, I was fully recovered to return to the campaign. It was said preparations were being made for the invasion of England. Hammocks were being made for the entire guard, with a blanket for each. The camp at Boulogne was in great activity, and we strutted about in Paris. But our turn came to take part in the land and sea manoeuvres, after grand reviews and manoeuvres in the plain of Saint-Denis, where we had to endure rain all day. The barrels of our muskets filled with water, weapon in hand. The great man did not move. Water ran down his thighs. He did not give us a quarter of an hour's grace. His hat covered his shoulders, his generals lowered their heads, and he saw nothing. Finally, he made us march past, and upon reaching Courbevoie, we were splashing like ducks in the courtyard. But the wine was there, and we thought no more of it. The next day we were given the order of the day to be ready to depart. "Pack your bags," said our officers. "Say your goodbyes to everyone, only the veterans remain." The order came. We had to take all the bedding to the storehouse and sleep on straw, ready to leave for Boulogne. We camped at the port of Ambleteuse, where we formed a beautiful camp. General Oudinot was above us with 12,000 grenadiers, who were part of the reserve, and every day at manoeuvres. We were brigaded to do service at sea in turn. We were put very far away, on a line of 200 barges. This entire little flotilla, divided by sections, was commanded by a good admiral, who was on a beautiful frigate, in the middle of us. For 20 days, always manoeuvring the pieces, we were gunners and sailors. Sailors, gunners, and soldiers. Everything became one person. The harmony was perfect on board. At night we called out, "Good watch," and the last replied, "Good watch everywhere." In the morning, the speaking trumpets asked for the night's report. "What is new on board?" "We inform you that 2 grenadiers threw themselves into the water." "Are they drowned?" repeated the speaking trumpet. "Yes," repeated the other. "Yes, my commander." "Very well." He said very well because he had understood the password. Once I was on a corvette with 10 large caliber pieces, 100 grenadiers, and a captain covered with wounds. I was the right gunner of a piece, for we had to do everything, and half stayed on deck at night. When my turn came to go down to lie in my hammock, I said, "Come on, old soldier, here you are in your hammock. Come on, rest." The master-at-arms heard me. "Where is the old soldier?" "Here I am," I said. "Where is your hammock? I will put you in a good place." And he placed my hammock near the biscuit boxes, lifted a plank. "Eat some biscuit, and tomorrow I will give you the bougeron," the small measure of brandy. We ate in wooden bowls, with wooden spoons, beans dating back to the creation of the world. All the rations per mess were in nets. It was fresh meat and sole. One day, the English gentleman came to visit us with a strong squadron. A 74-gun ship was insolent enough to arrive near the shore. It moored and sent volleys of cannonballs into our camp. We had large mortars on the height. A grenadier sergeant asked permission to fire on this ship, saying he would sink it with the first or second shot. "Get to work. What is your name?" said the consul. "Despienne. Show us your skill." The first bomb passed over. "You missed," said our little corporal. "Well," he said, "watch this one." He aimed and dropped his bomb in the middle of the ship. There was only a cry of joy. "I make you a lieutenant in my artillery," he said to Despienne. The English then fired blank shots to call for help, and the ship caught fire. The English jumped into our boats like theirs. Our little flotilla pursued their large ships. It was a sight to see all these little terriers after big dogs. It was curious. The English tried to return to the attack, but they were badly received. We were prepared. Our small boats caused damage. All the shots hit, and their broadsides passed over our barges. We were ordered to return to port for a grand manoeuvre along the entire line. Never had one seen 150,000 men firing battalion volleys. The whole shore trembled. All the preparations were being made for the landing. It was a Thursday evening that we were to set sail to arrive on the English coast on Friday. But at 10 o'clock in the evening we were disembarked, packs on our backs, and departed for the Pont de Brique to deposit our blankets. There were cries of joy. Within an hour, all the artillery was on the march for the beautiful city of Arras. Never had there been a more arduous march. We were not given an hour's sleep, day and night marching by platoon. We held on to each other to avoid falling. Those who fell, nothing could wake them. They fell into ditches. Sabre blows did nothing at all. The music played, the drums beat the charge. Nothing mastered sleep. The nights were terrible for us. I was on the right of a section. Around midnight, I drifted right down the slope of the road. There I was, falling on my side. I rolled down and stopped only after reaching a meadow. I did not abandon my rifle, but I was in another world. My brave captain descended to fetch me. I was broken. They took my pack and rifle, and I was well awake. When we were on the heights of Saverne, it was necessary to take carriages for the sleepers. Finally arriving in Strasbourg, we found the Emperor, who reviewed us the next day and distributed crosses. 2 nights restored us. We crossed the Rhine and marched long days to Augsburg, and from there to Ulm, where we found a considerable army that had to be pushed beyond a strong river before reaching a convent on an impregnable height. Marshal Ney, in the water up to his horse's belly, was having the bridge rebuilt despite grapeshot. The sappers fell, and this intrepid Ney did not move. As soon as the first span was laid, the grenadiers and skirmishers crossed to support the sappers. The marshal returned at a gallop to Prince Murat, took his hand, saying, "The bridge is finished, my prince. I need you to support me." "I am leaving immediately," he said, with his division of dragoons. They set off at a gallop. The weather was so terrible that the bridge was flooded. It was no longer visible. We were near this river, in a meadow. The water reached our knees. One had to see the guards splashing like ducks. Everyone laughed and walked in the water. I had the pot on my pack. It was not overturned. It filled with water. I poured it into my comrades' legs. Our rifle barrels also filled. We could not change position. The entire marshal's corps waiting for the water to recede to cross. The soldiers were in the mud. We were still the best placed. The water receded. The bridge planks became visible. The troops emerged from the mud and washed their legs, crossing the bridge. Our ducks left the meadow in turn, and the columns arrived at the foot of this monstrous mountain, defended by considerable forces, but nothing could resist Marshal Ney. Arriving in the village of Elkingen, he had it attacked house by house, with enclosed yards surrounded by walls that had to be scaled. This extraordinary village was taken at the bayonet, and our columns arrived at the convent, at the top of the town. The Emperor then had us climb at the double to finish off General Mack's army. The Austrians fought determinedly. Behind this village are plains suitable for manoeuvring, somewhat wooded, and the chain of mountains extends from the convent opposite Ulm. The enemy was not left alone for a moment. Murat covered himself with glory in his fine charges, and Marshal Ney only stopped before Ulm. The Emperor had the city surrounded on all sides, and finally gave us time to dry off. Unfortunately, a pretty bourgeois house caught fire. It was impossible to save it. The Emperor said in his anger, "You will pay for it. I will give 600 francs, and you will give a day's pay. Let it be given immediately to the owner of the house." Our officers grimaced, but they had to comply, and the guard has a house in this village. The owner had a good day, for he received a considerable sum. The Emperor summoned General Mack, who surrendered as a prisoner of war on October 19th. Orders were given to leave the next day at 5 in the morning. The entire guard moved to the foot of the Michaelberg, opposite Ulm. The Emperor positioned himself on top of this sugar loaf and had a good fire made. It was there he burned his grey coat. His entire guard was around him, and 50 cannons pointed at the city. I was on guard on the knoll, near the Emperor, who was talking to Count Hulin, general of the foot grenadiers. Suddenly we saw a column coming out of Ulm that seemed endless, and it arrived opposite the Emperor in a plain at the foot of the mountain. All the soldiers had passed their cartridge pouches over their packs to free themselves upon arrival at the disarmament place. They threw their arms and pouches in a pile as they passed. General Mack at their head came to hand over his sword to the Emperor, who refused it. All his officers and generals kept their swords and packs, and conversed with the senior officers for a long time. This exit lasted 4 to 5 hours. There were 27,000, and the city was full of wounded and sick. We made our entrance into Ulm to the cheers of all the people. The officers were sent back to their country on parole not to take up arms against France, and the Emperor made a proclamation to us. The day after the surrender of Ulm, Napoleon left for Augsburg with his entire guard. We made forced marches to reach Vienna. Marches of 18 and 20 leagues per day, that was the soldiers' ration. So, they said, "Our Emperor does not use our arms to wage war, but our legs." When the Emperor learned that Prince Ferdinand had escaped from Ulm with his cavalry, he sent Prince Murat and Oudinot's grenadiers in pursuit. We met them 10 leagues away. There were only carriages, cannons, caissons, and cavalry. They had taken half of their arms with 4,000 horses. The roads were covered with prisoners. We had left at midnight to join the advance guards, and it was necessary to cross the troops on the road without disturbing their path, on the sides of the road. We had to take the middle, in the mud and cross columns 2 leagues long. Our grenadiers made strides of a fathom and overtook 2 soldiers with each step, and I, with my short legs, trotted to keep up with my comrades. The Emperor slept in his carriage, and when he stopped, we had to stand guard, and the army corps passed. When these troops had made 15 leagues, the Emperor departed in turn. We had to pack our bags and swallow the entire distance, always at night. We could see neither town nor village. Fortunately, the Russians awaited us. Oudinot's grenadiers with Marshal Lannes and Murat made acquaintance. It gave us time to reach Linz, a little to the left of the main road to Vienna. This city is backed by high mountains, and the Danube flows at its foot between rocks. It is so narrow that it has forced its way through the rock crevices. This torrent is frightening. We stayed 2 days. Princes sent from Vienna arrived, then an aide-de-camp of Marshal Lannes announcing that the Russians were defeated. The next day the Emperor left at a gallop. He was sullen. "Things are not going well," our chief said. "He is angry." He gave the order to leave immediately for St. Polten. Before arriving, on the left are very high wooded mountains. There was a camped army corps. Then we left for Schönbrunn, the residence of the Emperor of Austria. This palace is magnificent, with forests surrounded by walls and filled with game. We stayed a few days to rest. Carriages came from Vienna. They courted Napoleon to spare the city. Army corps arrived at all points. Marshal Mortiers had suffered greatly. He stayed in reserve to recover. The Emperor did not waste much time. He gave orders for his guard to dress in full uniform, and he led them to traverse this great city to the cheers of a jubilant people at seeing such a fine body. We passed without stopping. We reached near the bridges, a short distance from the suburbs, in wooded areas where they are somewhat hidden. The great wooden bridge is superb. We said to ourselves, but how is it that the Austrians let us pass over such a beautiful bridge without blowing it up? Our chiefs told us it was a clever ruse by Prince Murat, Marshal Lannes, and the engineers' officers. We went to sleep in villages all devastated in terrible snowy weather. The Emperor took the lead. He went to the outposts to visit his army corps, and from there he set out for Brunn, in Moravia, where he established his headquarters. We could not catch up with him. This march was one of the most arduous. We had 40 leagues to cover to join him. We arrived on the third day, exhausted with fatigue. This town is beautiful. We had time to rest. We were near Austerlitz. The Emperor went on tours every day along the line and returned satisfied. We saw him joyful. The snuff-takings were frequent. It was a sign of his joy, and with his hands behind his back, he spoke to everyone. We were ordered to advance near the Pratzen Heights. In front of us, a river to cross, but it was so frozen that it was no obstacle. We camped to the left of the Pratzen mountain road, with Borodino's grenadiers on the right, cavalry behind us. On December 1st, at 2 o'clock, Napoleon came to visit with his marshals at our banner's front. We were eating quince paste. We had found full tubs of it in villages, and we made tartines. The Emperor laughed. "Ah," he said, "you are eating preserves. Do not move. You need to put new flints in your muskets. Tomorrow morning we will need them. Be ready." The mounted grenadiers brought a dozen large pigs. They passed in front of us. We drew our sabres, and all the pigs were caught. The Emperor laughed. He made the distribution, 6 for us, and the other 6 for the mounted grenadiers. The generals had a good laugh, and we had enough for good roasts. In the evening the Emperor left his tent, mounted his horse to visit the outposts with his escort. It was dusk, and the mounted grenadiers carried 4 lit torches. This signalled a charming spectacle. The entire guard took handfuls of straw after their barracks and lit them. They lit each other, one in each hand, and everyone shouted, "Long live the Emperor!" and jumped. It was the signal for all the army corps. I can certify 200,000 lit torches. The music played, and the drums beat to the call. The Russians could see from their heights, over 100 feet, 7 army corps, 7 lines of fires facing them. The next morning, very early, all the musicians were ordered to be at their post under pain of severe punishment. Here we are on December 2. The Emperor left early to visit his outposts and see the position of the Russian army. He returned to a plateau above the one where he had spent the night. He had us form a line behind him with Borodino's grenadiers. All his marshals were near him. He sent them to their posts. The army climbed this knoll to descend into the lowlands, cross a stream, and reach the foot of the Pratzen mountain, where the Russians waited for us quite calmly. When the columns had passed, the Emperor had us follow the movement. We were 25,000 bearskin caps and robust fellows. Our battalions climbed this slope with arms at rest, and upon reaching range, they greeted the first line with battalion fire, then crossed bayonets on the first line of Russians, beating the charge. At the first shock, our soldiers pierced the first line, and we, behind the soldiers, the second line. We pierced the centre of their army and were masters of the Pratzen plateau, but our right wings suffered greatly. We saw them struggling to climb this steep mountain. The entire guard of the Russian Emperor was massed on this height, but we were made to support the right strongly. Their cavalry advanced on a battalion of the 4th, which covered the battlefield with its debris. The Emperor saw it and told General Rapp to charge. Rapp launched with the horse chasseurs and the Mamelukes delivered the battalion, but was driven back by the Russian Guard. Marshal Bessières set off at a gallop with the mounted grenadiers who took revenge. There was a melee for several minutes. Everything was mixed up. No one knew who would prevail, but our grenadiers were victorious and returned to position behind the Emperor. General Rapp returned covered in blood, bringing a prince with him. We had been advanced at the double to support this fight. The Russian infantry was behind this mass, and we thought our turn had come, but they retreated into the pond valley. Unable to cross the congested causeway, they had to cross the pond on the left facing us, and the Emperor, who noticed their difficulty, brought down his artillery and the 2nd Grenadiers Regiment. Our gunners set up their batteries. There were cannonballs and shells falling on the ice. It gave way under this mass of Russians who found themselves forced to take a bath on December 2nd. All the troops clapped their hands, and our Napoleon took revenge on his snuff-box. It was a total defeat. The day ended with pursuing and capturing cannons, equipment, and prisoners. In the evening we slept on the beautiful position the Russian Guard occupied in the morning, and the Emperor gave all his care to gathering the wounded. There were 2 leagues of battlefield to cover to gather them, and all the corps provided men for this arduous task. In the evening, we went to fetch wood and straw in a village, on the reverse side of this mountain, facing the ponds. We had to descend quickly. There was no light to guide us. But our marauders found beehives, and to get the honey, they set fire to an immense shed. The fire illuminated us to transport everything we most needed for a freezing night, and to climb up tortuous paths. Finding no food, I seized a large pine barrel. I took a feather bed. I stuffed it in my barrel and had it placed on my back by my comrades. Then I climbed the hill. This wretched barrel rolled on my back, but I had the courage to reach my bivouac. I dropped my burden, and my Captain Renard immediately asked me to share my barrel. I went back to the village and brought back a load of straw, which I put in my barrel, then put the feather bed. We stuffed our heads in the bottom and our feet near the fire. Never has a night been more happily spent. My captain said, "I will remember you all my life." The next day we left for Austerlitz, a poor village with thatched roofs, with an old castle, but we found 600 sheep in the stables of this manor, and the distribution was made to the guard. The Emperor of Austria came there to meet Napoleon. After the 2 emperors came to an agreement, we left for Vienna at reasonable stages, and we arrived at Schönbrunn, in this beautiful palace where we were left to rest until affairs were settled. The guard was ordered to return to France by stages at a leisurely pace. What joy for us, and well fed. But the army did not return, the peace had to be signed, and our troops had time to recover. The stages were no longer 20 leagues. It was very convenient for us to find the food ready upon arrival. We were well received in Bavaria and crossed the Rhine with transports of joy upon seeing our homeland again. We were welcomed in Strasbourg and celebrated by these good people. I went straight to my lodging, where I had left my belongings in passing. I found everything in perfect condition. These good people touched me and said, "You are not wounded?" Their young lady said, "We prayed for you. All your linen is very white and your silver buckles are shiny. I had them cleaned by the goldsmith. Well, my young lady, I bring you a pretty shawl from Vienna that I beg you to accept." She blushed in front of her mother. The father and mother were overjoyed. I said to them, if I had died, it was for your young lady. He took me by the hand. "Let's go to the cafe," he said. "The guard is staying, you will have time to rest." This beautiful shawl came from the Imperial castle where I had been on guard. The lady asked me if I was married. I told her, "Yes, madam. I will make a gift for your wife, for your conduct with my husband." We headed for the beautiful city of Nancy, and from Nancy to Epernay. The 1st Battalion was detached to the village of Eylau, a league from Epernay. This is where they harvest sparkling wine. This town is very wealthy from the proceeds of its wines. They had not hosted troops for 15 years. It is impossible to be better received than we were. They did not want the guard to spend anything. They took care of all the expenses. You will not drink sparkling wine, they said, but tonight we will see. Be calm. You will be treated well. In the evening, after dinner, the sparkling wine arrived, and the owners had to take their soldiers to bed, leading them by the arms. They had no legs left. The next day, all the owners escorted us with their servants carrying baskets of wine, and our officers had to ask these good people to leave. Our drunkards fell into ditches. It was a mess. We had to rest for 3 hours in the plain, 2 leagues from Epernay, to give time to regroup, and the owners of A had to gather and bring back our stragglers. We were not reunited until the next day, but no one was punished. We arrived in Meaux, in Brie, where we were well received. I was alone. I went to present my billet in Rue Basse, which leads to Paris. I had my billet read, as I could not read. A fat gentleman said to me, "This lady is rich, but she will take you to the inn. Here, go to this locksmith's shop." I presented myself at this locksmith's and showed him my billet. "My brave man," he said, "my landlady will take you to the inn. Be calm. I hope to suit this lady. Come see me in an hour. But you won't be there. You will see that without noise." I climbed to the first floor. "Madam, I greet you. Here is your billet. But, sir, I do not lodge." "I know, madam, but I am very tired. I will rest a bit. If madam would be kind enough to get me a bottle of wine, here are 15 sous, and I will leave after." She left with my 15 sous to get me a bottle, and as soon as she left, I took off my coat and wrapped my handkerchief around my head. I got into her bed and began trembling with all my might. Madam arrived. Seeing me in her bed, she screamed, went to get her tenants, who were in on the joke. They said to her, "You must heat some well-sweetened wine and make a good broth for him. Cover him well. It's a strong chill." The rascals feasted at the miser's expense. In the evening they came to visit me, and the lady spent the night in her chair. The next day, Madam returned my 15 sous and escorted me out. The neighbours were delighted with the trick I had played. We arrived in Clay, and from Clay to the Porte Saint-Denis, where the people of Paris awaited us. They had erected a triumphal arch for us. We found in the Champs-Élysées tents and tables set with cold meats, with labelled wines, but unfortunately it rained so heavily that the dishes filled with water. We could not eat. They popped the bottlenecks with the corks and drank standing. It was pitiful to see us, all soaked like ducks. We left for Courbevoie with 3 battalions. One stayed to do the service. The Emperor gave us rest, and we were dressed all in new clothes. We passed beautiful reviews, and the good city of Paris gave us a magnificent dinner under the galleries of Place Royale. Nothing was missing. In the evening, a free play at the Porte Saint-Martin, they gave us The Passage of Mount Saint-Bernard as the performance, and we saw the good monks descending from this mountain with their big dogs following them. Seeing these good Capuchins and their dogs, I felt as if I were still dragging my cannon piece. I clapped my feet and hands. My comrades said, "Are you mad?" I replied, "But I saw them on Mount Saint-Bernard, these beautiful dogs, and here are the same Capuchins." The roll call was not until 2 in the morning, no one was punished, and all the little escapades were forgiven. This concludes the 4th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please consider subscribing for more episodes.